Okay, it is wonderful to have you here. We are going to talk about how to make a sustainability report for an SME or a small or medium sized enterprise. So, first, we are going to talk a little bit about the big picture, and then we're going to jump into specifics of how you, as a small and medium sized enterprise, can actually create your first sustainability report. So, first, we shall look at the big picture. So, you might have gathered, given that you have made it to this corner of the internet, that quite a bit is happening when it comes to sustainability reporting as a whole. And you might recognize some of these abbreviations. So, this is just a sample, and these are EU specific of regulations and frameworks and laws that have either come into place or will come into place at some point that are now kind of circulating and creating a bit of a ruckus around in the business world. So I very lovingly refer to this as the regulatory tsunami. So that is kind of where we're at currently. Everyone is trying to figure out what to do, etc. You, as a small and medium-sized enterprise, have a benefit here, and we're gonna get into that a little bit later. So, sustainability is not new, but the problem with the sustainability that we have seen so far is that to a very large extent it has looked like this. So normally, if I have people that actually respond in the crowd, I will ask, what is this an example of? And this is, of course, examples of greenwashing, because for a very long time, sustainability has kind of fit under the marketing umbrella within companies, which is not ideal. And actually, many of these ads actually ended up in litigation because it's not great with greenwashing, as you have probably gathered. But of course, even though these posters are very lovely and green, it hasn't really worked. So currently, the global warming is on the rise, which I'm sure you are aware of, and many other sustainability metrics are also not doing too hot. But this is the one that we usually use. Everyone is familiar with global warming. So what has essentially happened then, because we're seeing that none of these so-called initiatives are really working, good old European Union has gone, hold my beer. And what then happened in 2019 is the EU Green Deal. So you might remember this as a lot of men in suits and our friend Ursula shook each other's hand and congratulated themselves on having, created the new green economy of the European Union. And essentially, what has happened after this, that it didn't happen that much for a while. It was a little bit of a gap here, as you see, from 2019 to 2022. But that is when CSRD was adopted. So CSRD is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and then quite a bit after this. This timeline is not updated depending on when you see this. There are some conversations in the EU Commission about scooting some things and watering some stuff down. We will see how that goes. So just know that this is not necessarily representative of everything coming, but it is just an example of, just to make you see that a lot of stuff is coming for the bigger picture. Also, in terms of who reports when, so these are the bigger companies, and this threshold might also be changed sometime in 2025 or 26 or 27. The European Commission takes a little while before they decide on things. But essentially, as you can see, quite a few companies need to report to CSRDs, this big reporting directive. And this is a phase-in type situation where the first round of companies started reporting in 2025. Some will report in 26, 27, etc., if they fulfill a few different requirements. But that's not why you're here, because you're a small and medium-sized enterprise. But you may be sitting there and thinking, but we're too small, this doesn't apply to us. And you're correct, it does not. However, this is what I like to visualize it as. So we have the iceberg, which is CSRD, etc. So different laws, directives, and things that are coming into place. And the compliant companies are the tip of the iceberg. And then we have everything under here, which is broader expectations. And that is where you fit in, because this is going to change how business is done. So now that you're already in, now that you are an SME, it's a very good time to get on it. So I want to explain to you the holy trinity of Why start before you really, really have to? This is a model I also really like to use. First of all, time. So, if you're an SME, you have, or if you're a non listed SME, you currently have the luxury of time. First of all, you're currently a small company, but are you planning on always staying small? Odds are that you're not. You might want to grow, and then the regulatory tsunami will come very quickly. And secondly, we have. Oh, this one I need to change. What is it? And secondly, we have external factors, essentially, and broader expectations. So let's say that you have clients, which most companies do have, even if they are small. Well, ideally, they have clients. If your customer is required to report to any of these things, either the CSRD or CS triple D, whatever, they might or they will probably come and start asking you for non financial information, aka sustainability information. And then, as a supplier, it is then very important that you actually have this ready to go when they ask. And it's not that hocus pocus. Like, they're not going to ask for very tricky things, essentially, but we'll get back to that. So, the last one is money. Essentially, a lot of companies appreciate money and they kind of need access to capital and, fuel things like that. Just therefore, that is the final part of the holy trinity of why you should start before you really, really have to. Because, for example, 80% of global investors now have sustainable investment policies covering topics such as corporate social responsibility, greenhouse gas accounting, climate risk, transition and adaptation policies, nature risk, and target setting. So these are things that kind of they repeat themselves. And these are the things that, for example, investors look for. So therefore, it is very important to have that in order already if you are a SME. Which brings us to the nitty gritties, essentially. So, you would like to create your first sustainability report, maybe? This is the standard that we're following. The VSME is the voluntary reporting standard for small and medium sized enterprises. This is the gold standard for reporting for smaller companies, and I would like you to use this one when reporting to make your own life easier. So, what is it? So, it's a voluntary ESG reporting framework for small and medium sized enterprises, meaning that, like CSRD, the big corporate sustainability reporting directive, that is required by law for bigger companies. This is a kind of like a tiny equivalent for smaller companies that you can follow to create your sustainability report in the best practice methodology, essentially. That brings me to the best practice way to dip your toe, essentially, in the world of sustainability reporting. It creates a very good foundation that you can work off of. As I said, it is a simplified version of the CSRD. So, how to know if you actually fit into this bucket? I have made a few little tidbits here. I'm not going to go over all of them, but essentially, as you can see here, there are three parameters. The EU Commission loves to put the three parameters, and if you don't exceed two of the following, you will fit either into micro, small, or a medium sized company. Cool. So, what is actually in this? That is probably why you're here, and that is what we're going to talk about now. So, you have two different options. You can either do basic or comprehensive. There are two different versions of this that you can follow, and it's no requirement for micro companies to follow the basic one and comprehensive for medium, etc. But it is recommended, well, by me essentially, that you should, like, for a micro or a small company, you can use the basic version. For a medium-sized company, it is really smart to do the comprehensive. Now we'll look at exactly what is in here. Zip. So, in the basic module, this is literally all that is in here. It is not that hard. So essentially, in the first bulk here, we can see basis for preparation. This is just contextual information. This is information that you hopefully already have on your company. It is the company's legal name. It is how much money did you make in the reporting year? What was your balance? Like, very basic information that you already have. Do not worry about it. Which is quite good. Then we also report a little bit on policies and future initiatives, etc. It is very forward looking. So if you're worried, saying that, like, but we're such a small company, like we don't have policies for this, we don't have strategies for that. Well, okay, cool. Then your policy, well, then your strategy can be to create a policy. It means more. It is forward looking, and you're looking at, okay, we can't do this today, but just like I'm sure you have done for your company financially, you probably have some plans for growth and expansion and all of this. Need to do the same thing for sustainability, and that is essentially what you describe here. So, what are forward looking plans that you as a company have to contribute to sustainable development and mitigate your own negative impacts? Cool. So, on the environment side, we have energy and greenhouse gas emissions. So, if you're not familiar with greenhouse gas emissions, that is, well, you probably know a greenhouse gas emission. You can Google it if you don't know it. But here we only need to do scope 1 and 2, meaning the emissions from our own operations. Scope 1 being stationary or mobile combustion or refrigerants, which is normally very easy to find data on. And also scope 2, which is electricity, essentially purchased heating, cooling, and steam and electricity. And then also energy consumption. Not very hard. You find that on an electricity bill. And then for pollution of air, water, and soil, biodiversity, and water and resource use and circular economy and waste management, these you essentially have to determine, are these material? So essentially, are these applicable to our company, like you sustain my company? We actually made our first sustainability report this year, which I'll show you a little bit later. But essentially, we figured out that, okay, we are a small consultancy. We don't need to report on biodiversity. Sure, do we maybe have some impacts in some way, shape, or form? Probably, but it is not significant enough that it is worth reporting on. Essentially, and that is entirely fine, so that you can just decide as a company, does this make sense for us to report or not? So that goes for all of them except the greenhouse gas emissions one. Those you should include anyways. Methodology is really clear, not that tricky. And then we have the social metrics, which also quite easy. Hopefully you know the number of employees that you have, the type of employment that they have, their gender, and the country where they're stationed. Should be simple enough. And then health and safety in the workforce. Here you have to record if there have been any accidents or fatalities. So hopefully there's been none, but if there have, need to be reported on. Then you also report on some things like always struggle with this word, remuneration, collective bargaining, and training, which should all be HR data that you actually have on hand. Workers and value chain, affected communities, and consumers and end users. Here you can also look at, does this make sense for us to report on or not? And then for governance, simple enough. They literally ask you, have you gotten any fines for corruption or bribery this year? See, that is quite simple. So that is the basic module that can literally any company can manage to do this. It is not that hard. It can very easily be done. And then if you're a little bit bigger, or you want to go a bit above and beyond and really prepare for, the future expectations in the reporting field, we can do the comprehensive version, which essentially means that we need to do the basic one. So we need to include everything in the basis for preparation, environment, social, and governance here. And then there are also a few things on the environment and the social aspects that you also add to the reporting. So as you can see here on the environment, because on the basic one, we only reported scope 1 and 2. Here we also report scope 3, so value chain emissions. You can also, even if you are using the basic module, you can also report on scope 3. Do always recommend, doing some of the easier disclosures here. And then revenues from certain sectors and exclusions from EU reference benchmarks need to be reported on. Greenhouse gas reduction targets doesn't necessarily mean that you have a greenhouse gas reduction target already, but essentially you need to report on, is there a plan in place to get one, essentially, and if you have adopted a transition plan. And then climate risk also comes in here. This plays a really significant part in, the big CSRD. This is also extremely important for financial institutions. This is essentially where you look at your company and say that, okay, how can changes in the climate, well, how can the changes in the climate, like exposure to hazards, etc., how can that impact our company financially? Essentially, because that is a very plausible thing that can happen, that due to climate change, that your company will be impacted. That could be either in a positive way or a negative way. And therefore, for example, your bank, your investors and such could be very interested to get that information. And then we have the social part. We, of course, have to report on all the basic things that we did in the basic module. But here we get into stuff like gender diversity ratio in the governance body, workforce, so additional characteristics, so a bit more on the workforce. If you have human rights policies and procedures like a code of conduct or compliant handling mechanisms, which if you are then in the medium-sized category, you should really start looking at that, and then also look at severe negative human rights incidents. So essentially, do an assessment of, have there been any severe human rights incidents in either our own company or in the value chain. So this is, of course, a little bit a level up, but it's still quite a softball compared to the full CSRD. And that is why it is really, really good to start. So that's why I say you should start before you really, really have to. Get these things in place, because these are very key components of what you actually need to do for sustainability reporting. So if you have these down, then you're ready to grow. So you're ready to, like, if you suddenly go over a threshold for reporting, for example, you end up responding to CSRD, or maybe there are new domestic requirements that your government imposes, then you're ready, because like none of these things are new. Like, that is the beauty of what is happening in the corporate sustainability reporting field right now. It is very synchronized. Like, they will always ask you for greenhouse gases, climate risk, transition plan, human rights due diligence. It is always the same things. It is the same methodologies. So I would urge you, please start now. If you would like to see just a very simple example of what this can look like, as I mentioned, USustain has published our first sustainability report for 2024. We follow the basic module. It is incredibly simple. So it really isn't that hard. We managed to do it as a very small consultancy, but this is really good for us to, kind of create the basis that we can work off of. So I will leave a link down below to that so you can go and have a sneak peek. So, are you ready for your first sustainability report? So, as I said, this isn't necessarily rocket science, but it can also be a little bit tricky if you don't have any competency in the field to know exactly what to do and would like some help getting started. And that's why I would really quickly like to plug our VSME reporting packages. Certainly, so if you're in the situation that you are an SME, you want to produce your first sustainability report, we can help you out with it. So what we then do is that we can help you out with stakeholder interviews. So essentially, talk to people in your organization, maybe some key suppliers, key customers, your investors, your board members, anything like that, to kind of compile information on the company that can be reported on. We will then go on to consolidate the data. So that could, for example, be for the climate accounting, for example. And then we will we will write the report and also design it. And then after that, the most important thing, in my opinion, is that when the report is done, then hopefully, in communication with you, we will help you develop a strategy. It doesn't need to be that hard, especially if you're small, but it's very good to kind of just like have the strategy a little bit down to see, okay, but where are we going from here? Doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have the world's largest ambition and next year we're going to report on absolutely everything and yada yada, but we will help you kind of create a path for how can your company become future fit, because these requirements are not going anywhere. They are becoming, like, they will become stricter as time goes on, is at least my not just my prediction, it's a lot of people's predictions, and it will be extremely important to keep track of. So, yeah, reach out if you are interested, and it's been great hanging out with you. Okay, see you later.